last position, support. Here's the interesting thing. I actually suspect this is actually one of the roles where people can probably guess where the angle will go. But interestingly, it was one where actually a lot of us were all over the place with some of our like extra names.
This one's
because
hard.
actually, yeah. So the interesting thing is, right, there's two players. There's two players that we all named. So the first one is, of course, Mata. Take it away. Monty, maybe?
So Mata was the MVP of 2014 Worlds. He is a mastermind. He was also later on a variety of other teams, including the KT team, the same one that we've been talking about the whole time in 2018 with Score and Deft. He did have, he was benched at times later in his career because the individual ability was pretty garbage by the end. But his mind for the game has always been superb. He is the player. So unlike a player like Flame or a player like Madlife, he is actually probably the most innovative player who created a different way to play the position, who actually had significant competitive success, right? Because Flame didn't win the title.
All of it, yeah.
Madlife didn't win Worlds, but Mata did. Mata won Worlds, and he won a title later with KT, and with the previous version of Samsung as well. But
LCK, you mean? He said Worlds. LCK, you mean?
Yeah. Sorry.
Yes.
But I mean, this guy probably had the biggest peak and also had an insane effect on the way that supports roam, that supports plays vision, that they play with the rest of their team, invented kind of high level jungle support synergy, had a very high peak, was consistent for a number of years. Like I said, came back 5 years later and was still pretty good in Korea, still winning titles.
Yeah, I think that for me, like I have him as on my list as well. Like I think he's probably like the one that you have to say is the best. The thing that for me I never really like that I always just like withhold judgment is like the whole like shot caller angle, right? Like because that's like part of the reason why you're giving him this title is like because he is known as like being like pretty much the best shot caller of all time, or at least within 2014. Like he was like the most. That was when the idea of being a shot caller really mattered the most, and it seems like he was the one that did it best in the world. I think a lot of his strength comes from like the innovation, like you said. I think the duo support jungle warding was something that he's credited for. I mean, when we heard players on Team Talk, like it seemed like he was the guy that came up with like the idea of like, hey, I go with the jungler and we ward together, and then I go back to late. So. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much like I'm giving him. So I don't really care about influence and innovation as much on this tier list in general, but I just think that there hasn't been enough like great supports that anyone like has been mechanically good enough for long enough that they can overtake him. So like he's somebody that if we see a really great support, like I'd be pretty willing to change. But I think that right now, we've never seen a support that was good enough for long enough to really like compare him to anything or like to take away his crown.
Here's a stat for you, a piece of trivia, right? I'm obviously not counting the summer of season 9 because he was subbed out at that point in time. He wasn't the support. So I'm going to go when he was a starting player, and I'm going to show you the influence. And this is where people used to tell me with all the players I named, like there was Mithy. Well, how do we know he's a shot caller? Because he's the only one who remains. Everyone else changes, and they're all fucking teams that are at the top of the meta, and they're in contention to win. So you ready for some trivia? So he won with MVP Ozone in season 3, the LCK, right? Then he won Worlds with Samsung White, a slightly different team, the next year, right? Then in season 6, he won LPL with RNG. 0 players overlapping between these teams. Season 8, he goes to the KT Super Team, wins a split. Then season 9, he's on SKT, wins a split. Like, that's season 3, season 6, season 8, season 9, and season 4. He's like, at one point in time, his team is just the best in a major competition. Yeah. That is impossible if he is not having some sort of influence. Because as we say, we're not saying eye test. He was like, every game so absurd. Like, that isn't the angle. So just by process of deduction, I think he has to be like probably the best support ever.
Yeah, so I agree with that. I would just say that like because he won season 4 and he was so good in season 4, like I feel like that sets him up for all these.
He was never at that peak, yes, of course.
So like when he's going to RNG, like RNG, I mean he's playing with Uzi, right? Like so.
No, he won with Whoosh.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. I mean, but he's like going to RNG, like we assume because like he's joining. Like,
he was on a bad team in the meantime. He was on that team with Dandy. He went to the Vici team with Dandy, and they just shit in the bed. And then the next year he got onto.
So and then like the super team like that he joined in 2018, and then when he joined SKT, like I know it says that he won.
He was pretty washed back then. He
was washed. He was
summer and
washed.
spring, but Effort played the summer one, right? Like he didn't actually play.
That's why I said it doesn't count on that one.
Okay, all right. So I mean, I feel like 2014 is the one season where I would say that he's definitely the best support in the world.
Yes.
I'm not sure if the other seasons I would say he was the best support in the world.
No, probably not.
I would agree with that.
That's fair enough. That's why I say it has to be the influence angle that's heavy for him. But as Monty says, he has the influence and the championships.
Well,
and sort of like, listen, he doesn't have longevity because it's not peak performance, but he has an insanely long career.
Well, that's
and he won multiple titles, so
yeah. So that's the thing is like, so because like peak performance and all that stuff is like less factored into the support, that goes to like my second one, which I'm not sure how many of you guys agree with. My second one is Madlife.
Everyone has Madlife. It's the only other player. So go ahead.
Okay. So I think Madlife comes from the same idea where it's like his influence is more than like the titles and all that other stuff, and the fact that he went to a world final, like all that. Like it's just the fact that he changed the way support was played.
Yep.
People like he has a move named after him, which is the Madlife, because he would understand when people would be forced to use their summoner spells or forced to use their dashes, and essentially just aim for where they would end up rather than like where they started, which I mean sounds fucking obvious now, and everyone like ends up doing it. But like that, people didn't know that. Like I was influenced like that as a player. When I have that like flash prediction, like the Madlife body slam topside, like I wouldn't have been able to do that if he didn't exist and show like how high you can, like when you're playing with good players, what the chances are that people actually make the right move, which is extremely high. So that's like why Madlifing works out and people still do it to this day, is like if you put people in the right positions and they're a good player, people used to have the mentality of like they could do anything, they could flash anywhere, but in reality they can only flash so many places that make sense for them at a time that like would be optimal in the situation. So being able to like hone that in and like reduce like in your mind all the possibilities and then be able to like aim towards the most likely one, I think that was something that people didn't have a correct perception of.
It was also the first support player ever to actually be able to hard carry a team. Because of the way that he was playing like Thresh and like using Thresh Hook and Blitzcrank and Alistair, but using Thresh Lanterns to pull people in, like having somebody teleport in, then hook someone over a wall and then like pull with the lantern his teammate in. He basically invented like almost all of the Thresh mechanics that are still used today and debuted them at a professional level that was actually truly amazing at the time. And also, unlike Mata, he was definitively the best player in the world before Faker showed up, like immediately before Faker showed up. It really wasn't a question as to who was on top. So I think these are all like really important factors that lend themselves to Madlife. It was a very short time where I think he was kind of the king, unquestionably, but
end of season 2 to the beginning of season 3, right?
Yeah, basically.
I would just say the other thing is like the champions that he played, like outside of just the mechanics within those champions, because he was able to play these engaged supports or these hook champions at such a high level, it changed the way that people perceived the role, right? Like people thought
he changed the role entirely.
So people mainly thought that like the best supports were like Sona and like Janna and these types of champions because of like how much they could actually do later on, but like later on in the game. But he was the first person that showed how hard and how consistently you could shit on these types of like weak early game range supports with the champion like Thresh, with the champion like Blitzcrank, to like invalidate the Sorakas and all that other type of stuff. So I definitely credit him for like all of that type of stuff. That's why he's my number 2.
And even after his peak too, he was on some truly fucking awful teams, and
he'd be better for another year for sure.
He was put in space prison, and he was still good after that, and he was still like the best player on many iterations of Frost after they changed all of his teammates around.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, and like he came up with some really important playoff performances. I think he caused his team to overperform a lot of the time. If he got on the picks, he was really dangerous on. So there was a lot about this guy that I think was great.